Now, when we're talking about the Bible and Genesis and the origins of people who lived, um, we have the Neanderthals who lived in this Garden of Eden. But we hear in Genesis that um, this was not always a peaceful place. This after the fall, and they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. After Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, certain troubles arose. You have Cain and Abel, who Cain slew Abel, and you have a long list of descendants. Now we get to Noah, and Noah and his day, and it says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men and saw that they were fair, and they descended upon the earth to make wives of them. So, what is this talking about? Now, if you um, talk to biblical historians and people who know the Bible, they'll tell you that these are the fallen angels who came down and mixed with the people of this area. Now, the people of this area would have been Neanderthals. And who were these fallen angels, right? Well, to talk about this, we need to talk about some of the advancements that the Atlantean people would have had at this time. And the first thing we need to talk about is the ability of flight. Now, this might sound funny to you, but the possibility is very real that these people had flight. What evidence is there for this? Well, flight is something that has always been strived for by people. All through history, people wanted to know how to fly and strive to attain this ability. It was first achieved, though, in the 1700s by the Montgolfier brothers, who built hot air balloons. And this was discovered by one of the brothers, I forget which one it was, had a wife who had a dress, and he was drying the dress on in his house on the fire, like above the fireplace. And what he discovered and observed by looking at this was that the dress would actually catch the hot air and puff up. And this was where the concept of hot air balloons came from. And the Montgolfier brothers built small balloons at first using just fire and thin sheets of paper. And they perfected their methods, and they eventually built a hot air balloon that would carry humans. So the first hot air balloons were discovered then. But if you think about this, it is not a hard concept to understand that hot air rises. This could have been discovered at any period in time, and it is extremely likely that people had found this before. Okay, there's more evidence for this in the fact that hot air balloons, the way they work is the hot air inside the balloon is contrasted with the cold air outside of the balloon. This is why if you get in a hot air balloon, they mostly launch them either in the evenings when it's cold enough, wintertime, or in the mornings. And that's the main time that you're going to get in a hot air balloon, is early in the morning when it is cold out, because you need the contrast of the hot air and the cold air. This is what gives it lift. Now, there is no time in all of human history that's a better time to fly a hot air balloon Then in the Paleolithic, when it was extremely cold, we're talking the coldest climates that humanity has ever seen are in this time period. So the hot air balloons of Atlantis would have been made out of things that are primitive, but it's very possible that they could have done this. The best example I could give is that you can take animal hide and it can be stretched to an extremely thin level so that you can have a lightweight, thin sheet of skin. Now, one of the projects of the Church of Reason that we want to do is to recreate one of these hot air balloons to prove that it is extremely possible to create a hot air balloon using primitive technology. And we'd love to see this being flown and built, and it's my greatest desire to fly a primitive hot air balloon. So this is one of our first projects that we want to gain funding for and prove the fact that these people had the ability to fly in the Paleolithic. Now, the Paleolithic time frame that we're talking about had these hot air balloons. They also may have had gliders that would have flown across the air, possibly being dropped off by a hot air balloon. So, in other words, just like you see in videos today, they will take a glider, attach it to a hot air balloon, and once it's up high enough, you can detach the glider, and the glider will have enough air, to fly without having to be launched from a cliff or something like this. Now, so gliders and hot air balloons were the technology that these people would have had. Now, it would have been extremely rare. They wouldn't have used them. It's not like the entire culture was flying around in the sky. It would have been elite priests who would have flown these things, people who had tried it many times and developed it. It would have taken thousands of years to perfect this method, and it would have been extremely costly in human lives. Most of these flights would have crashed, flown off course, ended up in the ocean somewhere. It was extremely dangerous to fly around in these things. But nonetheless, they did it, and they spanned the globe. And this would explain very easily how the Cro-Magnon people would have expanded so quickly in contrast to the other peoples around the time who were, taking thousands and thousands of years to get, just out, across the landscape. So these hot air balloons were a wonder, and they would have shocked the people who they encountered with these flying devices. And of course, people would have revered them as gods. They would have thought this was magic and that this was something from, the heavens. And if we talk about Genesis, we hear that the sons of God saw the daughters of men and saw them as fair and descended on the earth. And this really matches the Atlantis concept that these people had become arrogant, and they would have gone to these people and claimed to be gods or the son of God, and they would have wowed these people using hot air balloon technology. They would have shocked people by how many people they were moving across the land at a time, and they would have surprised people with their adept spear tip points that they would have been able to hunt mammoths. The other thing about the hot air balloons is that they may have been used to actually track the mammoth herds and find out where they were headed much easier. And so this would have given extreme advantages to the Cro-Magnon people, and this would have been a shock to the system, to anyone who had not seen a hot air balloon, or believed that flight was possible. And of course, they would come down and say that they were the gods, and that they would want tribute, and they would want things, and they would have desires of the flesh. So in the Bible, when we hear about the sons of God coming down to the daughters of men, this would have been the Cro-Magnon people coming into the land of Eden and wanting to take the women from these Neanderthal people. And there's also more evidence for this in the mixing of these two people. And as I said before, all people living today outside of Africa have 2% Neanderthal DNA in their bloodstream, in their genetic code. So, more evidence that supports this concept. Now, the Atlanteans, the Cro-Magnons, what's the evidence that they lived in the Middle East at this time? Well, we've found recently in history that there is a site in Turkey, in the Middle East, directly in the Fertile Crescent, called Göbekli Tepe, and this is a very early Stone Age megalithic settlement. It's earlier than anything that's ever been found before, and it has all kinds of pagan concepts in its design. There's all kinds of sculptures of animals. The zodiac signs are found in Göbekli Tepe, and Göbekli Tepe would have been a site where the Atlanteans would have landed, and they would have colonized this area and claimed it for themselves. And what they would have done immediately is kicked out all of the Neanderthals. They would have taken the women, and they would have kicked out the men. Now, this talks about, or the Bible mentions that in those days there were giants, and giants walked the earth, men of renown. And this is a concept that would suggest that there were the mixing of these two people. Now, just like in the Atlantis myth, the Bible talks about God becoming angry and not liking what he sees happening on the earth, and that he decides to wipe them all out with a deluge. Now, the deluge is something that most scientists refute. They don't believe that the world was ever flooded, and this is something that has a major conflict with Christianity, but it's not as big of a conflict as you might think. The concept of a global flood is something that scientists don't believe in and don't find evidence for. But if we look in the Bible, it's not necessarily talking about a global flood. And I would refer back to Hugh Ross again, that this was not a flood that is a global flood. What we're talking about, instead of a global flood, is a worldwide flood. A flood that did not cover every part of the land, but it covered every part of the land that people inhabited. And this would also include the Atlantis island.